Hello and welcome to the Nano Film Improv podcast. I'm Dave Heron. This podcast is about my trials and tribulations associated with improv comedy and doing it, performing it, rehearsing it. So this is really a cathartic outpouring of the things that I've learnt, the things that I'm struggling with, and an opportunity to share with you and hear from you also some of the things that have worked for you, and equally there'll be some things on this podcast that you have tried that don't work for you. It's all very subjective. My experience level is, well, I've had a few years experience doing improv. I've taught a bit of improv. I've performed with a whole range of exciting and talented improvisers and learnt from sets that have gone well and sets that haven't gone well. And this is all part of an evolution for me as well. So you're very welcome in joining me on this podcast. The Phantom of the Improv is here, inside my mind. I'm looking out of this window pane, I don't know what I'm gonna be saying. As you can tell from the intro to this podcast, this week I'll be talking about musical and hip hop improv, and evidently my trials and tribulations associated with doing it. So a couple of years ago, I had watched quite a lot of musical and hip hop improv from a number of groups in and around London. I'm not going to name them all because there are so many good ones. Needless to say, I urge you to go and see any kind of form of musical or hip hop improv. That's of course the upshot of this podcast, because it is deeply, deeply impressive. But up until a couple of years ago, it wasn't something that I myself wanted to develop. I just wanted to focus very much on straight narrative improv that of course a lot of you who know me know that I'm very much interested in, and also it's just something I've spoken about on this podcast before. So it wasn't something that I really wanted to pursue. It was impressive, definitely, but not something that I was necessarily interested in pursuing myself. But that all changed when a good friend of mine, Ryan, who I perform with in Games, the short form improv group in London, went up himself and performed with a musical group to do some musical improv. Now, this was a gig that I was doing with Games, and Ryan was performing with Games that night as well, but he was also called up to take part in this musical improv group. And I remember him going up and doing this, and it was the first time, having seen him do it so very, very well, and of course everyone else performing very, very well as well, that I thought, maybe it makes sense for me to develop this musical muscle in improv rather than just relying on the long form improv narrative skills that I've been building myself. So that was quite pivotal for me, seeing Ryan, having performed and rehearsed with him many times doing short form improv where he is excellent at that, and then seeing him do something very different from a performance sense made me suddenly think, hang on, maybe I should be doing this as well. Now, the problem I immediately faced was that there wasn't anything readily available for me to go and jump into. What I did find was that the Maydays training course, they're now called And Also, down at Brighton, did Sunday morning drop-in sessions. So given I live relatively equidistant between London and Brighton, I went down for a couple of Sunday morning sessions where they were hosted by Jules and Joe down at And Also, and I was immersed in practicing short musical games and then progressing up to a small narrative musical. Now, those sessions were only 2 or 3 hours each, but they hooked me. They hooked me and made me think, yes, this could be a real string to my bow in terms of performing improv. But what I needed was to go from basics, and a lot of the people in the class were extremely good indeed, and so I was in awe watching them perform. But what I needed was a course, or indeed just a few classes, that would just take it right back to basics. What are the kind of things you should be looking at and developing in musical improv to get yourself up and running. Now, at around about the same time, Track 96, who are an excellent hip hop improv group performing in and around London, but elsewhere as well, ran a few drop in sessions once a month. And I managed to get myself a ticket for a couple of these sessions. And it was very, very different to anything that I experienced in quite a long time. I remember it didn't help that the air conditioning wasn't working in the Theatre Delhi rehearsal rooms up at Leadenhall Street in London. But I remember a rehearsal game that was going round in a circle, and each time it landed on a person, that person had to do a rhyming couplet. And it got to me, and I was sweating. I was really sweating and uncomfortable. I couldn't even rhyme a one syllable word. But there was a certain thrill and exhilaration about being well outside of my comfort zone. I knew that people were looking at me. I knew that I couldn't rhyme a single one syllable word. And that uncomfortableness was the thing that I'd been looking for, because I'd got very comfortable to a degree with certain facets of longer form improv. And that had put me in a very sort of comfortable state. But this was the first real time I remember feeling outside, well outside of my comfort zone. What I would add to that is that the guys at Track 96 were so super supportive and made me feel very inclusive. They weren't in any way sort of casting aspersions. They were wonderfully, wonderfully supportive. But that said, I still felt very uncomfortable. But suddenly, that level of uncomfortableness and outside of my comfort zone made me think, yes, if these other people can do it as well, surely there must be some hope for me to do it as well. So I'd had those two intro sessions at And Also and Track 96 for both the musical and the hip hop improv, respectively, that had shown me there was a whole learning curve to be overcome in terms of other areas of improv. But despite this new excitement that I had, this new exhilaration, I came back to the fact that I had nothing else really available apart from, as I say, the monthly drop-ins with Track 96, or indeed the monthly sessions with And Also down at Brighton. So I tried practicing in the car with my kids over time, so sort of short hip hop games, rhyming games, musical exercises in the car. But of course, like all things, they do tend to fall away unless you keep doing it every single time you're in a car. And let's face it, anyone with kids, you know that every time you get in a car, you're probably not wanting to get into a car with kids anyway, because usual humdrum and discussions, heated discussions or otherwise, take over. So that level of practice didn't give me what I needed, which was to really hone these rhyming skills and musical skills on a near regular basis. And of course, the other thing was I still didn't have the basic learning techniques and drills and methods. I'd had exercises and games, but I still wasn't versed in how to build it up from basic foundation blocks in both musical and hip hop improv styles. And then about a year ago, at one of our Gamez rehearsals, Ryan was able to source the wonderful Jordan Clark from Showstoppers, who is an excellent pianist. And he came along for a 3 hour session at one of our Gamez rehearsals. And it was the first time I was able to do musical improv at the real basic foundation beginner level. This is exactly what I needed. So we had games where there was no requirement to rhyme. There were games where we just sang in gibberish. And what I learned from that was, yes, it's okay to not have to rhyme. Yes, it's good to be bold. Yes, it's okay to find a line and just keep repeating it. This is obvious when you think about the basic tenets of improv around it's okay to fail, there is no failure. But when the stakes are heightened and you've got music behind you or you've got a beat going, it can build the pressure up quite a bit compared to normal long form improv. But now I've been told there was no requirement to rhyme in musical improv. You just had to be bold and physical like musical theatre. You could just find a one line and keep repeating it, and that might be your chorus. Or indeed, it might just be the line that you sing as your character. I didn't need to be able to improvise a full scale song on my own without any kind of backing or support. I just needed to keep to the minimum amount as a foundation level. At our Gamez rehearsal, not only did we practice slightly longer form narrative, but because of the nature of Gamez being a short form improv group, we practiced short form games, but with a musical edge to it. And that gave me confidence to go on stage at a gig at Hoopla a couple of months later, I think it was, and perform Three-Headed Expert, where an expert is asked questions about a topic of expertise suggested from the audience, where that expert is three people but done one word at a time. I was able to do that and sing it at a gig and felt absolutely fine. I think it was with Nell and Ryan from Gammas. Again, Nell's a fantastic improviser as well, and I really enjoyed doing scenes and short form games with her. And it's that confidence with those two other improvisers that we were able to go up and do it. And I think we were singing about cheese. Yes, please. And that was our chorus line. But again, simple, but very effective. And the audience really enjoyed it. And that gave me a real confidence boost. And then a few weeks later, at another Gammes gig at Hooper in London, Ryan and I did the game Greatest Hits, which, if I can remember the format correctly, is a series of different scenes which start off with spoken word and then break into song, a bit like a musical theatre show. And I remember being on stage with him. He's an excellent musical improviser as well, so let's bear that very much in mind. And he was able to carry a lot of it. But being with him on stage made me feel emboldened to just emphasize chorus lines or jump in or be big, physical, like musical theatre. And that game went down so well indeed. And it was relatively simple. All I needed to do was repeat some of his lines or interject a little bit so there was a bit of playfulness between the two and very big physicality. And dare I say, I think it even went to being a little bit smutty about taking one's trousers off in the show as well, which again always helps with a musical number. But what I was finding was that I was now, over the last 6 months or so, finding myself doing musical improv and not being as absolutely petrified about doing it as I was originally. You got to be able, I think, to be able to step on stage emboldened, knowing that you haven't got the answers and knowing you've got that added pressure of musical numbers behind you and the beat going as well. But being emboldened and singing something is pretty much what people want you to do. They don't care. They're not there to see a wonderful musical number. They just want to see you get out there and sing something and embrace it. And that is what I try and push myself through when I'm doing musical stuff now. Even though I cannot lie, there is still that incredible, terrifying nature at the back of my head that's saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And then over the summer, Dingbats of Hawley ran a musical course. Again, real back to basic principles stuff. But this was a 6 to 8 week course run by my very good friends George Butcher and John Meisler. And it was fantastic doing it with friends locally and being able to build up again, remind myself of the core tenets of musical improv that had been covered by Jordan previously, but actually over a longer period and able to really embed those and work out what worked and what didn't work. And recently I went on the Dingbats retreat, which was an amazing weekend of improv, fun, socializing. And at this retreat, as well as a number of other classes going on, which you can go and see by looking at dingbatsimprov.com. So I'll let you go and peruse that. But a number of sessions were held by John and they were musical classes. And I just took full advantage of that because I just thought this is where at the moment I see a major gap in my improv and I need to just get better and use these sessions, take advantage of these sessions to get better at doing musical improv. And it massively helped and massively boosted my confidence. And that culminated in me doing a Three-Headed Expert song with my good friends Harry and Emily, which went down so well. I was really proud of it. But I've just been talking about musical improv. What about hip hop? That seemed to have died a little bit of a death earlier on in this podcast. Well, not so. My very good friend Lewis Hill ran an amazing hip hop class at the Dingbats retreat. And I'd been very nervous about doing hip hop, more so than musical improv, because I think with musical improv you can still getting yourself into a relative comfort position if you just repeat the line or you sing it legato. Look, yes, I know musical words like legato and staccato, and that's about it. But with hip hop improv, I think the beat really does push it on more and it amps up the terrifying nature of it all. But his class was excellent. It brought it back down to the foundation building blocks, making people feel comfortable. So starting off with a rap battle, but in gibberish. So you'd come on and go zap ba da boo ka kapi dooby dee da ba wa bucky dooby da ba. Can't actually believe I'm doing that into a podcast, but you get the drift. So it started off with very basic, feeling comfortable tenets of improv, and then building up with one rhyming couplet, two rhyming couplets, and then into an all out sort of rap battle. But again, with supportive people around you. And it was great to be able to do something with a good friend of mine in a local environment, and he was excellent. And I felt very, very safe and secure in that. And so, what this ended up doing at the culmination of this retreat was having Lewis with his hip hop and John with his music combining like a fusion. So we had everybody in a circle who was in the class, and John came and joined us. And we started doing a bit of a rap battle where somebody would jump into the middle, do a bit of rapping, even if it was just one couplet, and then jump out again. And somebody else would jump in and do what they could do for as long as they wanted to, and then jump back out again. But if people weren't comfortable doing rapping, then they could just jump in and do a musical one-liner, two-liner. And it was brilliant. And for people, including myself, who at the start of the retreat would have been terrified about doing musical or hip hop improv, people were jumping in. There was no fear of failure. It was a truly wonderful moment to culminate the retreat in where, as I say, things that would be typically seen as being very difficult or challenging in an improv sense, people were just throwing caution to the wind and jumping in, and it was a lovely shared experience. So hopefully my journey on that will start to get better and better as I get more opportunities to practice with friends, certainly locally, and friends up in London and elsewhere as well. I'm going to try and make use of these opportunities because they don't come around very often. If you're looking for something that's going to push you outside of your normal improv comfort zone, you've got a little bit comfortable doing longer form improv because it's easy to get on stage and talk about how you feel with other characters, well, why not do that in a musical sense? Or why not explain how you feel about the other character in a hip hop rap battle? That's something that I'm going to be trying to do at a stage very soon. How do you feel about musical improv? What sort of things terrify you about it? Or what sort of things, conversely, do you thoroughly enjoy about it? I'd love to hear the kind of things that inspire you about musical and or hip hop improv and the kind of trials and tribulations you've faced as well and how you've thought about overcoming them. So thanks very much for listening to the Nano Film Improv podcast, and I'll catch you in the next one.